I purposely swapped the card in my clutch before my sister-in-law's party. When the tab reached $68,000, she smirked. "Brother, fund my lifestyle today." My husband smugly reached into my clutch for the card, but a devastating surprise was waiting. The private dining room at the restaurant smelled of expensive truffles, vintage wine, and absolute arrogance. The crystal chandelier above our table cast a golden glow on the remnants of a feast that looked like it belonged to royalty. Empty bottles of champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent littered the white linen. At the center of it all sat Cassandra, her face flushed with alcohol and unearned pride. When the waiter approached, looking nervous, and placed the sleek black leather checkbook on the table, the room fell silent. Cassandra snatched it, opened it, and her eyes went wide. But she did not look terrified. She looked thrilled. The tab was $68,000. She threw her head back and laughed, a shrill, grating sound that I had endured for 7 long years. She looked directly at her brother, my husband, Harrison. She smirked, tapping her manicured nails on the leather. "Brother, fund my lifestyle today. Show everyone who the real king is." Harrison puffed out his chest. He looked so incredibly smug, so desperate to play the wealthy benefactor in front of Cassandra's shallow friends. Without even asking me, without even a glance in my direction, he reached over and pulled my designer clutch toward him. He snapped it open, his fingers blindly searching for the heavy metal card he always used to fund their delusions. He found it. He handed it to the waiter with a practiced flick of his wrist. But they did not know what I had done earlier that afternoon. They did not know the card in his hand was nothing more than a piece of useless plastic. Let me take a step back, because to understand the absolute devastation of that night, you need to understand the nightmare I was living. My name is Valerie. I am 38 years old, and I am the creative director and majority shareholder of a highly successful logistics and supply chain company. I did not build the empire from the ground up. My father did. When he passed away, he left his life's work to me. I grew up with money, but my father taught me the value of hard work, humility, and quiet wealth. We never flashed brands. We never bragged. Then I met Harrison. Harrison is 40 years old now. When we first met, he was charming, handsome, and seemed so deeply caring. I thought he was my rock. But over the years, the mask slipped. Harrison was a man who loved the idea of wealth, but had absolutely no capacity to generate it himself. He liked the country clubs, the tailored suits, the imported cars. And tethered to him was his younger sister, Cassandra. Cassandra is 35 years old, but she acts like a spoiled teenager. She has never held down a job for more than 6 months. She believes she is a misunderstood genius destined for high society. And Harrison? Harrison enabled her every single delusion. In his eyes, the money I brought into our marriage was not mine, and it was not ours. It was a family fund, and Cassandra was the primary beneficiary. I was not a wife to them. I was an ATM machine that happened to live in the same house. If you are wondering why I stayed, or why I let it happen, you have to understand how manipulation works. It is never a massive theft all at once. It is a slow, steady bleeding. It is death by 1,000 small swipes of a credit card. It started with small things. Paying off Cassandra's credit card debt because she was feeling depressed. Covering her rent because she quit her job to find herself. But then the numbers got bigger. 5 years ago, Cassandra decided she was getting married. She demanded a destination wedding in a luxury resort in the Caribbean. Her fiancé was a struggling musician who contributed nothing. Harrison came to me, wrapping his arms around me, kissing my neck, playing the perfect husband. He said, "Valerie, my parents are gone. I am the only one who can give my little sister the wedding of her dreams. We have more than enough. Please, let's do this for her." I relented. I wrote a check for $50,000. 2 weeks before the wedding, the groom ran away with the bartender. The wedding was canceled. The resort offered a partial refund, but Cassandra kept every single penny of it. When I asked Harrison about the money, he looked at me like I had kicked a puppy. "How can you be so insensitive, Valerie? She is heartbroken. She needs that money to heal. You are being incredibly selfish right now." I ended up apologizing. Yes, you heard that right. I apologized to him for asking for my own money back. That is what gaslighting does to you. It makes you question your own sanity and your own boundaries. Then came Harrison's career. He decided he was tired of his mid-level corporate job and wanted to be a consultant. He needed seed money, he said. He needed to look the part to attract high-end clients. I funded his startup. But the startup never actually started. Instead, he bought an $80,000 imported sports car through the business account. He bought designer watches. He rented an office downtown that he barely visited. When I confronted him about the lack of revenue, he exploded. He told me I was suffocating his creative process. He told me I was holding my family money over his head to emasculate him. Every argument ended with me backing down, just to keep the peace. I loved him, or at least I loved the man I thought he was. I kept making excuses for him. I told myself that once he found his footing, he would stop leaning on me. But parasites do not stop leaning until the host is completely drained. Cassandra learned from her brother. She realized that my guilt and my desire for a peaceful home were my biggest weaknesses. She stopped asking me for things and started telling Harrison to get them for her. I was completely isolated in my own marriage, entirely surrounded by people who only loved what I could buy them. The real tragedy, the one that almost destroyed my entire life, happened 3 years ago. It was a brutal winter, and I caught a severe case of pneumonia. It escalated rapidly into a terrifying lung infection. I was rushed to the emergency room, struggling to breathe, my fever spiking dangerously high. They admitted me to the intensive care unit. I spent 2 weeks in that hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, hooked up to monitors and oxygen machines. During that time, Harrison played the role of the century. He slept in the uncomfortable hospital chairs. He held my hand while the nurses changed my IVs. He cried in front of the doctors. I felt so incredibly guilty for being sick, and so grateful that he was there taking care of everything. On the 3rd day, when I was heavily medicated and barely able to keep my eyes open, Harrison brought a man into my room. He was a lawyer. Harrison sat on the edge of my bed, stroking my hair gently. He spoke in a soft, soothing voice. "Valerie, sweetheart, the hospital administration is driving me crazy with billing issues. And there are some urgent tax documents for the house that need to be signed. I cannot handle it without your signature. The lawyer here drafted a simple general power of attorney. It just lets me sign checks and handle the paperwork while you rest and recover. It is just temporary, babe. I promise." I was exhausted. My chest burned with every breath. I trusted my husband with my life. I nodded, took the pen with a trembling hand, and signed the document. I did not read the fine print. I did not realize the absolute, terrifying power I had just handed over to a man who saw me as a bank. A general power of attorney is a dangerous document. It gives the designated person the legal right to make almost any financial or legal decision on your behalf. They can access your bank accounts. They can sell your property. They can take out loans in your name. When I finally recovered and went back home, life returned to normal. The hospital bills were paid. The taxes were filed. In the chaos of getting back to my life and my company, I completely forgot about that piece of paper. I never legally revoked the power of attorney. It sat in a drawer in Harrison's home office, a loaded gun just waiting for him to pull the trigger. And 3 years later, when his sister needed money for her biggest delusion yet, he did not hesitate to shoot. The nightmare began to unravel exactly 4 weeks before that infamous dinner. It was a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. The sun was shining. I was in the kitchen, drinking my black coffee, feeling somewhat optimistic about the day. Harrison had left early for a networking breakfast. For a few months, we had been talking about buying a small, quiet cabin by a lake in upstate New York. It was supposed to be a place just for us, away from the city, and more importantly, away from Cassandra. We had been pooling money into a joint liquid savings account specifically for the down payment. I sat at the kitchen island, opened my laptop, and logged into our shared banking portal to check the exact balance so I could call a real estate agent. The screen loaded. I stared at the numbers. I blinked, thinking my eyes were tired. I refreshed the page. The numbers stayed the same. The balance was barely over $3,000. My heart completely stopped. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt freezing cold. $150,000 was gone. Just vanished. There was a single, massive wire transfer dated 3 days prior. The recipient name was masked as a string of numbers. My first instinct was pure panic. I thought we had been hacked. I thought someone had stolen our identities. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone on the granite counter before I could dial the fraud department. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I clicked on the transaction details to get the routing number. I needed to know where my money went. But before I could call the bank, a chilling thought crept into the back of my mind. Hackers usually drain accounts through multiple small transfers or by crypto. They do not usually do one clean, domestic wire transfer. I sat there in the silence of my massive, empty house, and the reality began to sink in. The call was coming from inside the house. I closed my laptop. I did not cry. I just felt a sickening, hollow feeling in my stomach. I spent the entire day walking around like a ghost. I went to the office, but I could not focus on a single report. I just kept staring at the wall, running through every possible scenario, hoping against hope that there was a logical, innocent explanation. But deep down, the woman who had spent 7 years funding Harrison's excuses knew exactly what had happened. I just needed him to confess. Harrison came home that evening whistling a cheerful tune. He kissed my cheek, poured himself a glass of expensive bourbon, and asked about my day. I watched him. I watched the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. I watched the easy confidence in his posture. I waited until we were sitting at the dining table eating dinner before I dropped the bomb. I kept my voice light, almost casual. By the way, Harrison, I logged into the joint savings account today to check our cabin fund. It looks like there was a massive wire transfer. Almost the whole balance is gone. Do you know anything about that? He did not flinch. He did not drop his fork. He actually smiled. Oh, that. Yes, sweetheart, I meant to tell you this morning. I moved the funds. My golf buddy, Richard, let me in on a highly exclusive, high-yield municipal bond package. It guarantees an 8% return in just 6 months. The lake cabin market is terrible right now anyway. I figured we could grow the money and buy something even better next year. I did it for our future, Valerie. He spoke with such conviction. He even went to his briefcase and pulled out a glossy, professionally printed brochure about municipal bonds to show me. For a split second, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe the trauma of the past had made me cynical. I nodded, told him I wished he had consulted me first, but let the argument die. I went to the kitchen to load the dishwasher, feeling foolish for doubting him. But the universe has a funny way of exposing liars. About an hour later, Harrison was in the shower. His iPad was sitting on the kitchen counter, plugged into the charger. I was wiping down the granite when the screen lit up with a sudden chime. It was an email notification. I usually never invade his privacy, but my eyes caught the preview text before the screen went dark. It was from a commercial real estate broker. The subject line read, "Lease executed." The preview text read, "Congratulations on securing the premium retail space, Cassandra and Harrison. The keys will be ready on Monday." The glass I was holding slipped from my hand and shattered in the sink. Municipal bonds. A high-yield investment for our future. It was all a perfectly constructed lie. He had taken our cabin money, my money, and bought his sister a luxury retail space. I stood frozen, listening to the sound of Harrison singing in the shower, and I felt something inside me completely snap. The loving, accommodating wife died right there in the kitchen. I did not confront him when he got out of the shower. I smiled. I told him I was tired and went to bed. I lay perfectly still in the dark, listening to his breathing until it slowed into a deep, rhythmic snore. It was 3 in the morning. I slipped out of bed, walking barefoot across the hardwood floor so I wouldn't make a sound. I went straight to his home office and gently closed the door. I sat at his mahogany desk and opened his laptop. The password prompt blinked at me. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried Cassandra's birthday. Incorrect. I took a breath and typed in our wedding anniversary. The screen unlocked. It felt like a sick joke. I opened his email client and searched the name of the real estate broker. Dozens of emails flooded the screen. I read through them, my blood turning to ice. Cassandra was opening a high-end luxury fashion boutique. The lease was astronomical. But the lease was just the beginning. She needed inventory. She needed interior designers. She needed marketing. The $150,000 from our savings was just to secure the location and pay the broker fees. I kept digging. I opened a hidden folder on his desktop labeled Project C. Inside were PDF documents from a major commercial bank. I clicked on the largest file. It was a loan agreement. A massive, staggering commercial business loan for $2 million. The borrowers were listed as Cassandra and Harrison. I scrolled down, my hands trembling violently. A loan that size for two people with zero verifiable income required massive collateral. I needed to see what he had pledged. I found the collateral appendix. There it was in cold, hard, black and white text. Harrison had pledged 70% of my inherited stock portfolio from my father's company. He had used my shares, my life's work, my security, to guarantee a $2 million loan for a boutique that was destined to fail. I scrolled to the signature page. My name was there, but it wasn't my signature. Below the forged scrawl were the words, signed by Harrison under general power of attorney. The room started to spin. The hospital. The pneumonia. The lawyer standing by my bed. It all came rushing back. He had kept that piece of paper for 3 years, waiting for the perfect moment to exploit me. If Cassandra's boutique failed, and it absolutely would, the bank would seize my company's shares. I would lose the controlling interest in the business my father bled to build. Harrison hadn't just stolen from me. He had sold my legacy to fund his sister's vanity project. I sat in the dark office, staring at the glowing screen. I didn't cry. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it bypassed sorrow and went straight to pure, unadulterated rage. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was so desperate for his love that I would just accept this when I eventually found out. He thought he had won. I carefully forwarded every single document, every email, every contract to my private secure email address. Then I cleared his browsing history, closed the laptop, and went back to bed. I lay down next to the man who was actively destroying my life, pulled the blanket up, and promised myself one thing. I was going to burn his entire world to the ground. If you are enjoying the story so far and want to see how I take down Harrison and Cassandra, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps push this video to more people who need to hear it. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the revenge. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I slipped out of Harrison's office, walked quietly down the hallway, and locked myself inside the master bathroom. The marble floor was freezing against my bare legs. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold tiles, pulling my knees to my chest. I did not cry. That is the strangest part about profound betrayal. You expect tears, you expect to scream and shatter mirrors, but when the damage is that absolute, your body just goes numb. It is a survival mechanism. I sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the air conditioning, and I mourned the death of my 7-year marriage. It was a funeral with only one attendee. I thought about the day we got married. I thought about the vows he took, looking deep into my eyes, promising to protect me and honor me. It was all a performance. Every kiss, every anniversary dinner, every time he told me he loved me, he was just making deposits into a bank of trust that he fully intended to rob. I looked around the luxurious bathroom that my money had paid for. The imported Italian tiles, the custom double vanity, his expensive colognes lined up perfectly on the glass shelf. He had built his entire identity around the wealth I provided, and then he decided that simply having access to it was not enough. He wanted to own it, and he was willing to destroy my father's legacy to do it. The realization washed over me slowly. He did not just make a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pay the electric bill. Forging your wife's signature using a medical power of attorney to pledge her inherited company stock as collateral for a $2 million loan is a calculated, cold-blooded act of financial violence. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that if Cassandra's ridiculous vanity project failed, the bank would seize my controlling interest in the company. He was willing to let me lose everything, absolutely everything, so his spoiled sister could play at being a successful entrepreneur. As I sat there, the numbness began to fade, replaced by something much colder and much more dangerous. It was an absolute, terrifying clarity. I was no longer a wife trying to save her marriage. I was a CEO dealing with a hostile takeover. Harrison thought he had the upper hand because he thought I was blinded by love. He thought I was soft. But he forgot that I am my father's daughter. My father did not build an empire by being soft, and he did not raise me to be a victim. When the sun started to rise, painting the bathroom window in shades of gray and pale blue, I stood up. I washed my face, brushed my hair, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was different. The accommodating, people-pleasing wife was dead. The woman standing there now was a weapon. I made a silent vow to myself. I was not just going to divorce him. A divorce would just be a mild inconvenience to a parasite. I was going to legally, systematically, and completely obliterate his entire world. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I walked through the glass doors of my company, greeted the receptionist with a warm smile, and took the private elevator to the executive floor. I bypassed my own office and walked directly to the end of the hall. I knocked twice and entered the office of Julian. Julian is 55 years old. He is the chief financial officer of the company, but more importantly, he was my father's closest friend and most trusted advisor. He had known me since I was a child. He was a man of numbers, a man who saw the world in ledgers and risk assessments. I closed his heavy oak door behind me, locked it, and sat down in the leather chair across from his desk. He looked up from his dual monitors, noting my pale face. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I pulled a flash drive from my purse, the one containing all the downloaded files from Harrison's hidden folder, and slid it across his desk. I told him everything. I told him about the missing $150,000. I told him about the commercial lease. And then, my voice completely steady, I told him about the power of attorney and the $2 million collateral pledge using my shares. Julian is a man who never shows emotion, but as he opened the files and read through the loan agreement, his face turned the color of ash. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed his temples. The silence in the room was suffocating. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with pure disgust. He told me that this was not just theft, it was a massive breach of fiduciary duty. Because Harrison used a document intended for medical emergencies to conduct corporate financial maneuvers without my knowledge, the legality of the collateral pledge was incredibly fragile. But we had to move quickly and quietly. If Harrison caught wind that we knew, he could try to liquidate other assets or move money offshore. Julian and I spent the next 4 hours locked in that office, mapping out a financial war strategy. First, we had to protect the company. Julian initiated a quiet restructuring of my shareholder dividends. We routed all future payouts, bonuses, and liquid assets out of my standard accounts and into a newly formed, ironclad trust where I was the sole trustee and sole beneficiary. Harrison would have absolutely zero access. Second, Julian began drafting the necessary corporate documentation to formally report the unauthorized pledge to the bank's fraud and compliance department. We were not going to trigger the report immediately. Julian explained that timing was everything. We needed to let the lease get finalized, let the money get spent, let them get perfectly comfortable in their stolen castle before we pulled the rug out from under them. Julian looked at me across the desk, his eyes fierce with a protective anger. He promised me that by the time we were finished, Harrison would not even be able to afford a bus ticket out of the city. I left his office feeling a deep, powerful sense of control. The trap was being built, piece by piece, and the rats had no idea they were already standing inside it. With the company's flank secured, my next stop was a high-rise building downtown. I had an appointment with Meredith. Meredith is a 45-year-old family law attorney who is widely known in the city as the absolute worst nightmare for cheating and stealing spouses. She was expensive, ruthless, and operated with the cold precision of a surgeon. Sitting in her minimalist, glass-walled office, I handed her copies of the same documents I had given Julian. Meredith did not express shock. She had seen the darkest parts of human nature for 20 years. She just methodically flipped through the pages, making notes on a legal pad with a silver pen. When she finished, she leaned back and looked at me. She told me that I had two choices. I could confront him now, file for an emergency injunction, and go through a long, messy, public legal battle. Or I could play the long game. She explained that right now, the commercial bank believed the $2 million loan was perfectly secure. But the moment I legally revoked the power of attorney and filed a formal declaration that the collateral was pledged fraudulently and without consent, the bank would panic. She explained the concept of a margin call. When a bank realizes their loan is suddenly unsecured, they do not politely ask for a new guarantor. They demand immediate repayment of the entire loan balance. If Cassandra and Harrison could not produce $2 million in cash immediately, the bank would execute an emergency foreclosure on the boutique. They would seize the property, seize the inventory, and freeze every single account tied to Cassandra's business. Meredith smiled, a sharp, predatory smile. She said, "Valerie, we are going to draft the divorce papers today. We are going to cite gross financial infidelity. We are also going to draft the official revocation of the power of attorney. But we are not going to file them today. You are going to go home, and you are going to play the loving wife. You are going to let your sister-in-law plan her grand opening. You are going to let them spend the loan money on expensive lighting and imported clothing racks. And on a date of your choosing, we will drop the guillotine." We picked the date. 3 weeks from then. It happened to be the night Cassandra was hosting a massive, lavish dinner party to celebrate her supposed success, a party she had already begun bragging about on social media. It was the perfect stage. I spent 2 hours with Meredith finalizing the details. I signed the divorce petition. I signed the eviction notice for Harrison to vacate my house. I signed the revocation forms. Everything was loaded and ready to fire. I walked out of Meredith's office into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time in 7 years, I did not feel like a victim of my circumstances. I felt like the author of my own life. Now, the hardest part was about to begin. I had to go home and sleep next to the enemy. The 3 weeks that followed were an exercise in extreme psychological endurance. It is one thing to hate someone from a distance. It is an entirely different level of torture to live in the same house, sleep in the same bed, and share morning coffee with a man who has secretly mortgaged your entire future. Every single day was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I would wake up, feel his arm draped over my waist, and I would have to force myself not to shove him off. I would turn around, smile softly, and wish him a good morning. I would listen to him talk about his day, about his fake consulting clients, about how tired he was from working so hard for our future. It made me physically nauseous. I had to swallow the bile rising in my throat every time he kissed my forehead. I had to pretend to be excited when he showed me brochures for the lake cabins we were supposedly still going to buy with the money he had already stolen. The gaslighting continued, but it no longer worked on me. One evening, he came home with a bouquet of expensive lilies. He handed them to me with a sad, pathetic look in his eyes. He said, "Valerie, Cassandra is feeling really overwhelmed with the new boutique. The stress is getting to her. She asked if we could float her a small loan, just $10,000, to cover some unexpected marketing costs." He looked at me, waiting for me to cave, waiting to play the victim if I said no. The old Valerie would have argued, cried, and eventually written the check just to make the tension go away. The new Valerie just smiled, took the flowers, and smelled them. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Honey, you told me all our liquid cash is tied up in those municipal bonds for the next 6 months. I really wish we could help her, but our hands are tied, right?" His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. He had trapped himself in his own lie. He forced a smile, nodded, and said, "You are right, sweetheart. I will tell her we cannot do it this time." I walked to the kitchen to put the flowers in a vase, feeling a dark, twisted sense of satisfaction. I was learning to play his game, and I was playing it better than he ever could. Every day that passed was another day the trap grew tighter. I just had to hold on a little bit longer. 2 weeks before the dinner, Cassandra invited me to tour the boutique. She framed it as a sisterly bonding moment, but I knew exactly what it was. It was a victory lap. She wanted to rub her newfound, stolen wealth in my face. I agreed to go. I dressed in simple, elegant clothes, applied my makeup flawlessly, and drove to the premium retail district downtown. The boutique was massive. The smell of fresh, expensive paint and polished hardwood floors filled the air. There were crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, velvet seating areas, and racks of clothing that cost more than most people make in a month. Cassandra was standing in the center of the room, barking orders at 2 young interior designers who looked absolutely miserable. When she saw me, she practically floated over, a smug, condescending smile plastered on her face. She gave me the grand tour. She pointed out the imported Italian marble countertops. She bragged about the exclusive designer contracts she had supposedly secured all by herself. She kept using words like self-made, hustle, and girl boss. She turned to me, looking me up and down with a critical eye. She said, "You know, Valerie, you should really let me style you once we open. You have the money, but your wardrobe is just so boring. So safe. A woman in your position should really know how to project power." It took every ounce of self-control in my body not to burst out laughing. I was standing in a building funded entirely by my father's life work, looking at a woman who had never earned a single dollar on her own, and she was lecturing me about projecting power. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I touched a silk scarf on a rack, smiled gently, and said, "It is a beautiful store, Cassandra. You and Harrison must have worked incredibly hard to pull all this capital together. I am so very proud of you both." She beamed, completely missing the sarcasm dripping from my words. She tossed her hair over her shoulder and said, "Well, you know Harrison. He always takes care of his family. He believes in my vision. We are going to make millions." I spent another hour nodding and smiling, listening to her talk about her empire. When I finally walked out of the store and got back into my car, I let out a long, shaky breath. The sheer audacity of these people was breathtaking. They truly believed they were untouchable. They believed I was just a blind, useful idiot. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, and I whispered to myself, "Enjoy your chandeliers, Cassandra. In 14 days, the bank is taking them all back." The day of the dinner finally arrived. The tension in my body was coiled so tight I felt like a piano wire ready to snap. The plan was in motion. At exactly noon, I made the final phone call to Julian. He confirmed that the fraud report regarding the unauthorized collateral had been officially transmitted to the commercial bank's legal department. The mechanism had been triggered. The bank's algorithms would flag the $2 million loan, the compliance officers would review the revoked power of attorney, and the margin call would be issued by the end of the business day. Next, I called Meredith. She confirmed that a process server was standing by, holding the divorce papers, the eviction notice, and the preliminary foreclosure documents we had legally obtained through the emergency injunction filed that morning. She would personally bring them to the restaurant at the designated time. At 2 in the afternoon, I sat at my laptop and executed the final financial purge. Julian had already secured my company assets, but the personal accounts were still vulnerable. With a few clicks, I transferred every single penny from our joint checking, joint savings, and shared investment accounts into my new, private sole ownership trust. I left the balances at exactly 0. Then I called the credit card companies. I reported the black luxury card, the one Harrison used as his personal piggy bank, as compromised. The operator confirmed the account was permanently frozen and the physical card was dead. At 6 in the evening, Harrison came into the bedroom. He was wearing a tailored navy suit, looking like $1 million he did not actually own. He smiled at me in the mirror as I fastened a diamond necklace around my throat. "You look stunning, Valerie," he said, kissing my shoulder. "Cassandra is so excited for tonight. It is going to be a huge celebration for her." I smiled back at him in the reflection. "I am looking forward to it," I replied. I walked over to my vanity and picked up my designer clutch. I opened it. Inside was my lipstick, my phone, and the dead black credit card. I placed it right in the center, perfectly positioned for him to grab it later. I snapped the clutch shut. The click echoed in the quiet bedroom. It sounded exactly like a lock turning on a prison cell. I turned to my husband, linked my arm through his, and said, "Let's go celebrate your sister's success." We arrived at the VIP private room of the restaurant. It was a scene of absolute excess. Cassandra had invited 20 of her closest, equally shallow friends. The table was practically groaning under the weight of the food and alcohol. There were towering seafood tiers piled high with oysters and lobster tails. There were tins of beluga caviar. Waiters were constantly circling the table, pouring a vintage champagne that cost $2,000 a bottle. I sat quietly near the end of the table, sipping a glass of still water with a slice of lemon. Harrison, of course, was holding court near the head of the table next to Cassandra. He was laughing loudly, telling exaggerated stories, playing the role of the wealthy patron of the arts. Cassandra was in her element. She stood up multiple times to give toasts to herself. She talked about the struggles of being an entrepreneur, about how hard she had hustled to secure the funding for her boutique, and about how she was destined to change the fashion landscape of the city. Every time she spoke, she would cast a condescending glance in my direction. At one point, she leaned over the table, a champagne flute in her hand, and said loudly, "You know, Valerie, you should really take some notes tonight. This is what real ambition looks like. Not just sitting in an office managing daddy's money, but actually creating something from scratch." The table erupted in polite, sycophantic laughter. Harrison chuckled along with them, not doing a single thing to defend his wife. I did not flush. I did not look away. I simply raised my water glass toward her in a mock salute and smiled. I let them eat. I let them drink. I let them rack up the bill. I sat there for 3 hours, watching the financial meter run higher and higher. The more they drank, the louder and more obnoxious they became. They were celebrating a victory built on a foundation of absolute lies. And then, the moment arrived. The dinner was over. The plates were cleared. The manager of the restaurant, a young man named Preston, walked into the room carrying the black leather checkbook. The room quieted down. Preston placed the book in front of Cassandra. And that brings us back to the moment the tab reached $68,000. Cassandra laughed, yelled at Harrison to fund her lifestyle, and my husband, full of arrogance and stolen pride, reached into my clutch and pulled out the dead card. Harrison handed the card to Preston with a flourish. "Keep the change," he said loudly, even though the tip was already included. Preston took the card, nodded respectfully, and walked over to the portable payment terminal resting on a side table. The entire room was watching. Cassandra was smiling triumphantly at me, waiting for me to look annoyed. I just rested my elbows on the table and waited. Preston slid the card into the machine. He typed in the $68,000 amount. The machine processed. Then, it let out a sharp, loud beep. Declined. The word flashed in bright red letters on the small screen. Preston frowned. He pulled the card out, wiped the chip on his apron, and inserted it again. Another loud beep. Declined. The silence in the room suddenly became very heavy. The clinking of glasses stopped. Cassandra's smile faltered. Preston cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "Sir," he said softly, looking at Harrison. "I am sorry, but the card is declining. Do you have another form of payment?" Harrison's face turned bright red. He stood up, looking flustered and angry. "That is impossible," he snapped. "Run it again. The machine is broken. There is no limit on that card." I finally spoke. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. "The machine is not broken, Harrison. The card is dead. I canceled it this afternoon." Harrison froze. He slowly turned his head to look at me. The confusion in his eyes was almost comical. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Why would you cancel the card? Give me the other one, the backup." I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. "There is no backup," I said calmly. "And there is no money in the joint accounts either. I emptied them." Cassandra slammed her hands on the table. "Are you insane?" she screamed. "You are embarrassing my brother in front of my friends. Pay the bill right now, Valerie." I stood up slowly. I looked around the room, making eye contact with her silent, shocked friends, before settling my gaze directly on my husband. "I am not paying for anything," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "And I am certainly not funding the lifestyle of a man who forged my signature to steal my father's company." Harrison's face went from red to a terrifying, sickly pale white. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. "Val," he whispered, panic leaking out of every syllable. "Val, stop. Do not do this here. Let's go home and talk." I took a step toward him. "We do not have a home, Harrison. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you really think you could use my medical power of attorney, a document you made me sign when I was dying in a hospital bed, to pledge my company shares for a $2 million loan for your sister's boutique?" Gasps echoed around the table. Cassandra's friends were staring at them in pure horror. Cassandra looked wildly between me and her brother. "What is she talking about?" she demanded. "Harrison, tell her she is crazy." But Harrison could not speak. He was hyperventilating, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He knew it was over. The illusion was shattered. I did not give them a chance to recover. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed a number. I put it on speakerphone and held it up. Julian answered on the first ring. "Julian," I said clearly. "Is it done?" Julian's deep, authoritative voice filled the room. "It is done, Valerie. The fraud report was filed. The bank has officially declared the $2 million commercial loan unsecured due to fraudulent collateral. They have triggered the margin call. The accounts are frozen." I ended the call and looked at Cassandra. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. "The boutique," I said softly. "The bank is foreclosing on it tomorrow morning. You do not have a business. You have $2 million in immediate debt." Cassandra let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She lunged toward Harrison, grabbing the lapels of his expensive suit. "You told me it was safe. You told me it was your money. You ruined me." Harrison tried to push her off, his eyes pleading with me. "Valerie, please. I am your husband. I love you. We can fix this. I will cancel the lease. I will give it all back. Please don't do this to me." Right on cue, the heavy wooden doors of the private dining room swung open. Meredith walked in. She looked immaculate in a sharp charcoal suit, carrying a thick manila envelope. She walked straight past the crying sister and the begging husband, and handed the envelope to Harrison. "Harrison," she said briskly, "you have been served. These are the divorce papers, effective immediately. Also included is an emergency eviction notice. You have exactly 1 hour to remove your personal belongings from Valerie's property before the police are called for trespassing." Harrison took the envelope with shaking hands. He looked down at it, and then he looked at me. The reality of his absolute destruction had finally hit him. He had nothing. No money, no cars, no house, no wife, and a $2 million fraud investigation waiting for him in the morning. I turned to Preston, the manager, who was standing frozen against the wall. "Preston," I said, pulling a new, sleek silver card from my pocket. "Please charge this card for 1 glass of still water with lemon. As for the remaining $67,990, I suggest you ask the hosts to wash the dishes." I tapped my card on the machine. It beeped. Approved. I put the card back in my pocket, picked up my clutch, and walked toward the door. I did not look back. I walked out of the restaurant, stepped into the cool night air of the city, and took a deep breath. For the first time in 7 years, my chest did not feel heavy. I was completely, beautifully free. So, Reddit, am I the jerk for playing the long game, letting them humiliate themselves publicly and racking up a $68,000 bill before pulling the plug on their stolen empire? Or did they get exactly the karma they deserved for 7 years of financial abuse and betrayal? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button, turn on notifications, and share your verdict in the comments below. See you in the next story.